welcome. I was thinking as we were gathering back there that this is a group of women who are here because not only do they walk the talk themselves as individuals, but they use their pulpits, and many of the women around them use their pulpits to do exactly the thing that we're going to talk about today, which is creating solutions for change and driving change. And I want to start by saying I have been working for something on the order of 2 decades, maybe even a little longer than that. And in that time, I've never experienced a period where there was more dialogue, more conversation, more sort of fervor and energy around the issue of gender equality and around the issue of advancing more women into the leadership ranks. So that feels terrific, and you all and many of the other women around you and in this room are responsible for that. But at the same time, that's sort of in stark contrast to the fact that in the last decade, particularly at the top of the corporate world, top of politics, at the top of institutions, we haven't really seen a whole lot of real change. So Fortune 500 CEOs, still less than 5%. Directors of global companies, I think still inside of 15%. And in our industry, in the marketing and ad business, people working in creative and leading creative directors, still well inside of 5%. So we're at a moment when real change is needed, and this group is going to talk about that. Let me spend just a minute giving you a sense of who these incredible women are and what the pulpits are that they stand behind. To my right is Allie Kline, who is the Global Chief Marketing Officer, a little company you might have heard of called AOL. She spent a long career in data and tech marketing before coming to AOL, and as many of you probably know, AOL is associated, affiliated with, and puts on the Makers Conference, which is a very important part of the movement. So welcome, Allie. I'm going to say we're going to do applause for everybody at the end. Next to Allie, we have the amazing Regina Mailer. Regina is the founder of not one but 2 companies, CEO and founder. One is called the Women's Speaker Foundation, which does exactly what you would think it would do. And the other is called First Row, and it's about executives trying to advance their brands. She's going to have a lot to say about all of these topics. Next to Regina is my friend, Jackie Kelly, the Chief Operating Officer of Bloomberg Media. Jackie has been the CEO or the COO or an executive at virtually every important media company in the world except the New York Times, although I welcome her to come there. She's been on the agency side as a CEO at IPG and also worked at Martha Stewart, USA Today, and Yahoo. So welcome, Jackie. Woman who needs no introduction, Carolyn Everson, the head of all things brand and advertising at Facebook. Carolyn has an incredible pulpit. She uses it very publicly, both on Facebook and in forums like this. And my favorite fun fact I have about Carolyn's background is that years ago when she was an executive at MTV, she actually suggested, do you know what I'm going to say?
I have
that
no
they
idea.
should buy Facebook.
Oh, wow.
But they
That's
didn't
true.
necessarily think that would be a good thing to do at the time. So look how that worked out. So welcome, Carolyn. Also delighted to have Sophie Blum here. Sophie is the VP of all things brand for Procter & Gamble in Europe. She's also the head of a really cool thing at P&G called the House of Innovation, which we'll talk about a little bit. And the coolest thing about Sophie in her career is she spent 24 years at P&G, and from what I could tell, really rising. And then on the end, the reason we're all sitting on this couch, for if there are 1 or 2 people in the room who don't know her, this is Shelley Zalis, all of our dear friends. Shelley is, that one gets a round of applause. Shelley is the CEO of a new company that she started called the Female Quotient, and she's also the founder of the Girls Lounge. Stop by if you haven't already. The best way I can describe Shelley is her Twitter bio is Chief Troublemaker, and we love that. That's how we get into conversations like this. She's an entrepreneur, spent a long time as an executive in research, an entrepreneur in research, sold her company, and this is what she's doing with her career now. So big welcome to all of you. Extraordinary pulpits. Let's use them well. Regina, I want to start with you because you and Shelley both have sort of left either the corporate world or the world that isn't about gender equality specifically to focus your career on advancing women. I want us to start by just talking about where we are in the problem. And what I want to ask you is, you 6 years ago started the Women's Speaker Foundation because there weren't enough women doing what we just did in green rooms. And I want to ask you, are we getting better yet? How does it feel from the place that you sit?
It is moving, I would say, but it's slow moving, way too slow for me because my nature is I'm impatient and I really want to make a change. Peter Drucker said a while ago, culture is eating strategy for breakfast.
Right.
And I think this is what it is on corporate culture. If the corporate culture doesn't change, we can implement any additional female program. It's just not us alone only, it's the society. So it's men and women together. We really have to make a change. The good thing is we have more and more women, executive women coming to us and asking us on, you know what, I'm overachieving, I got the best results, I'm really up to top of what I ever delivered, but I have no awareness. And this is why I actually founded Women's Speaker Foundation. I think we don't need another certificate, we don't need another diploma, whatever, we need awareness. So that's why I founded the second company, which is only focusing on what the name says, first row. How do you get in first row? How to make an expert, how to make a brand out of an expert. And the nice thing is, women coming up to us now, so we have a pull effect. And the super nice thing is, the very first men are coming and saying, this is great, what are you doing? Can you work with us as well? So yes, we're moving, but not fast enough.
So you made a big statement, which is just flat out, corporate culture doesn't change. Shelley, you built a business all about trying to change corporate culture, but you've also spoken out that you're pretty frustrated on where we are in the conversation. So give us your take on where we are in the problem.
I think we just keep talking about it. I mean, I don't know about you guys out there, but I'm sick of it. And I think it's just getting annoying already. How many more conversations do we want to talk about the fact that there's a problem? There's a problem, and so let's fix it. And I think that's why we called it Walk the Talk. We need to create solutions for change, because if we keep admiring the problem, and if we keep talking amongst ourselves, we will wait for another 100 years until we reach gender parity by some, nature of God or something. I'm not really sure. But it ain't going to happen by itself. So what the fuck are we talking about? You know what I mean? Let's just get to it. And I think, the most amazing thing is, action leads to change. And I really do applaud Demexco and Christian and Frank, because it's what we're doing up here. Mm-hmm. We walked into that speaker's room with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 badass chicks. And, all the guys that were in there were like, where the hell did you all come from? Here we are. And this is where it starts. Change the conversation by acting that way. And once you do that, the others will follow. And, the ones that don't will have FOMO factor, because they're going to be the ones left out. And I think that's what it's going to take.
So I love that. Carolyn, I want to go to you here, and I want to just press one more question on where we are in the problem, where we are in the conversation. Is something missing from the conversation? So we're going to talk a lot about operating models and action, but is there something that isn't being talked about that leaves us, just as Shelley says, admiring the problem?
I agree with Shelley. I mean, there are countless stages, rooms. Every company that I certainly get the privilege to work with is talking about not only gender equality, but diversity and inclusion more broadly, on all forms of diversity, because actually the numbers are poor across almost every dimension, not just females. So we are talking about it, but I agree with Shelley, it's got to start moving to action. What we're trying to do, we've been very public at Facebook. Google has done this as well, as is Deloitte & Touche and some other large companies. We are publishing our diversity numbers now for everyone to see. And what you track and what you measure is what you manage, is what you get. And by putting it out there and saying, these are our current numbers, they are not satisfactory. We serve a community of 1.7 billion people, all fabrics of life. Our culture needs to represent that. purely from a business point of view, let alone a social responsibility point of view. And I think that the business argument is so sound at this point that I would find it hard to believe that an executive or a CEO wouldn't acknowledge that boards with women outperform with men by about 24 to 27%, be it 10 billion market cap or smaller businesses. And there is such inherent bias in how we hire women that I really think it takes action by individual managers. What we've done at Facebook, and it's starting to move the needle, but I want to be clear, we're early days, is we have something called a diverse slate approach. So if my senior leadership team comes to me with an open head count, and they have 3 finalists that they put in front of me, if I don't see a diverse candidate, diverse can mean a lot of things. It could mean women, it can mean certain ethnicities, it can mean certain, sexual orientation, the whole gamut. If I don't see a diverse slate, we send them back to the drawing board. And they don't come back until we put finalists in. That action needs to be done at every single level of the organization. Anyone that has the authority and responsibility to hire people has the responsibility to move these numbers.
So not enough quantitative grounding to the conversation. If we were to pinpoint what's missing and what you don't feel like your company has left behind. Let's shift in the conversation from the problem and talking about it to what I like to refer to as operating models for change. What's the real work that companies need to do? The cover of Harvard Business Review last month, cover story was diversity. There was a big piece by a man named Frank Dobbin who essentially raised the question, why do most diversity efforts fail? So Sophie, I want to go to you here for 2 reasons. 1, same company for 24 years. And 2, that company, P&G, I looked this up, they're on the Diversity 50, so incredibly well ranked as a company that's great to be a woman or a person of color working at. What's the operating model there? What's really working? And I want you to give us as unvarnished an answer as you can.
Look, first, let's ask ourselves the question, which company would dare to take its most precious asset and to take it and scream and shout in order to fight against, I would say, gender bias? So I think it says it all. This is definitely for us, I would say, diversity is a game changer. Okay. It's a business strategy. It all starts like this. We like it or not, it is anchored into the business. We are a consumer good company. We serve consumers. Okay, they are diverse. The minimum we owe them is to make sure we represent fairly in a very diverse manner. The second thing I think that is very rooted is that it's not one shot. It's not the sensational, shiny object. It's a long-lasting strategy. You are laughing at me because I've been there for almost 25 years. I get
I'm applauding you for that. I'm applauding you.
Now, I'm going to scare you. I'm going to tell you that this strategy and supporting women, starting in the early, 1 century ago, in the early 1900s, okay, with women joining the workforce. Amazing. Then in the 50s, with offering maternity leave. And then in the 90s, with applying and being very disruptive in terms of applying organization strategy on flexible work arrangement. And I have a vivid memory of this one, the last one, because it's closest, even though almost 25 years, it's closest, where I was one of the first team leaders to use the opportunity to leverage flexible work arrangement. Guess what? Best business result, best productivity, and the most inspired and motivated team. So, we have it all. I think the last thing we learned, as far as the operating model is concerned in the very recent years, is diversity is a measure. And in terms of numbers, we are geeks, so I'm going to throw some numbers. So 50% at recruitment, 45% of all our managers are female, and up to the board of directors, which has 40%. So yes, the number we deliver, but that's not only about the number. It's about, I would say, how do we drive the culture? And my best way to express that is, I think at the end of the day, inclusion is a skill. Diversity is a measure, inclusion is a skill. And that's why a skill that you can learn, that you can invest on. And it's not a female, I would say, topic. It's a male and female topic. And that's why it has to be anchored into, I would say, the conversation. So at the end of the day, that's why I'm saying diversity for us is a game changer.
So I love that. Diversity is a measure, inclusion is a skill. You also said something incredibly profound about P&G does so well at this because they've been playing a very long game. In the early 1900s, they were worried about this. When I think of who at the company is responsible for playing the long game, it's the CEO.
Yeah.
And the rest of the C-suite. And Jackie, I want to go to you here because you work at Bloomberg. You work at a company whose job is basically to inform the C-suite about what's going on in the world. To what degree do you feel like there are operating models in place in the world and at your own company so that CEOs understand what Sophie just said and are embracing it?
Yeah, I think that we've done a couple of things. We've launched a couple of products. One is a terminal function called the Gender Equality Index. It goes to Carolyn's point that you have to add transparency to this. So as an organization, we've added transparency and data and the context of the combination of those things for the financial market for 35 years. We've now taken that and we've looks at four aspects. It looks at gender stats. It looks at company policies, and do those policies help support a culture of care that Shelley talks about that really supports not just women, but people and the diversity of the flexibility they might need. We look at community. What is the community involvement of that corporation? How are they bringing the community into their organization? And we look at product development. Do they have products specifically orientated towards different diverse groups? And that comes together as sort of a quantitative mix, and then there's a survey that goes along with it. We have 28 charter companies, all from the financial sector to begin with, but we have JP Morgan Chase, MasterCard, Visa, Amex, huge corporations that have participated in this. So it's early game, but our belief is that we have a responsibility to provide the measurement. So it's one way, just as Facebook is saying, we're going to make this public. These companies have chosen to go in with us and begin to make it public. In the terminal, it's under the financial indicator functions, which is really, really important because it is an indicator of financial performance of a company. So our hope is that as people are evaluating organizations, they now have another way of evaluating them, one metric. We also are launching a show that we started very lightly this summer called Walk the Talk that we affectionately coined with Shelley that will look at these issues because we want to bring CEOs on our air. In the second quarter alone, we had 425 CEOs on our air. We would like some of those to talk about what they are doing to really change the conversation so that we can begin to learn from one another. And then the other thing I will add that I think is really important, and several of us touched on it, but it really does begin with us as leaders of the organization. And Peter Grauer, who's our chairman, is the head of the 30% Club in the US and is working with lots of different companies to make sure that women are board ready, to make sure that by 2020, 30% of boards are made up of women. And the reality is there's not a pipeline. A lot of companies, a lot of chairs of boards or the search consultants within them might say there's not a pipeline for this. And so the 30% Club is working to train women to make sure they are board ready and to make sure that nobody can use that as an excuse. And so I think there is progress being made. It certainly takes longer maybe than any of us would like, but I do see real indications of progress.
I just want to press on one of your points, and I want to ask you, Carolyn, anyone who wants to answer this. Are we getting better as a corporate world at sharing data, at exposing the world to the data? Because you just talked about a rich trove of that data, but most people couldn't say this company is doing well or not.
Well, what I would advocate and what I've seen at Bloomberg, and I really admire the courage we've had, is we, not unlike Facebook, we've begin to share the data internally. So each one of us as a business owner has to be tracking our metrics against diversity. We meet every 6 months. We have to demonstrate progress against them or explain why we didn't have progress. And we have to have creative ideas that impact the entire organization of what we're doing. So there's real accountability for us to demonstrate it.
And we're tracking it as well. We're tracking it actually even more frequently than that, just because the pace of hiring at Facebook is at a very high rate. But I think transparency for companies is actually the wave of where companies need to be regardless of the topic. And I mean, no one better than our own CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, who models transparency on a daily basis, be it the internal Q&As that he does with the entire company, the fact that employees get access to information that is not made public for quite some time. We are very transparent internally with our own employees, and now Mark's going external with Q&As. I think that's the expectation. I think it's the expectation of business leaders. I think government leaders, we're seeing that play out, where people are going to have to stand behind what they vote for and why they voted for certain issues. The consumers, the people have the right to know what companies are socially conscious, which ones care about gender equality, which have the right policies. That's how they're going to make decisions, not only where they work, but I believe where they're going to buy products from.
But Meredith, I think
Please,
it's
jump
also
in.
really important to say you can't fix what you can't measure. And
Yeah.
I think the most important thing, you know, we just had the Girls' Lounge at Davos at the World Economic Forum, and, you know, we're going backwards in general.
Yeah.
And when you look at the numbers, I mean, for the United States, we've dropped 7 points on the gender equality, you know, index. And, you know, a lot of it is because we're all talking about the problems and not addressing it. And gender equality is not a female issue. It's a social and economic issue. And so the more we can start creating measurement and accountability
Yeah.
and connecting the GEI, the Gender Equality Index, from the terminal with business success and equating it's not just a nice to have, but it is a need to have as a business imperative. And if we get this thing right, we have an opportunity to add over $12 trillion to the GDP by 2025, according to McKinsey. I mean, that's a huge number. And so I think, you know, we have to, of course, measure it and document it, but also start translating that diversity does lead to business success, and it will hopefully move the needle, which will also help us change our culture so that we attract and retain the best talent. And we attract millennials, the
Right.
purpose generation.
Right.
They only want to come and work for companies that are making the world a better place and doing the right thing.
Bloomberg, by
so-
the way, the work that Jackie and the team is doing, I mean, the moment this goes to the bottom line,
Absolutely.
and the moment you start making investment decisions, I do believe that's a turning point. I
It
applaud
is.
the work that they're doing. I think
Yeah.
it's
Go
fantastic.
Bloomberg.
So go Bloomberg.
I don't take any credit for that.
There's a big quantitative piece. There's a big transparency piece. Shelley, you just made an incredible point about you can't just do that either. You have to connect it back to culture. You have to connect it back to who's in charge, how do they behave, and what is the culture of the organization. Allie, I want to come to you here. I told Allie in preparation that the thing that was so exciting to me about AOL was in the lifetimes of the women, professional lives of the women on this stage, how many women executives had been made there, born there, done extraordinary things there. Arianna Huffington, Susan Lyne,
Yeah.
Dylan McGee, you, and the list goes on and on and on. And I just read this amazing quote from Hillary Clinton that said, I think women in general are better listeners, are more collegial, are more open to new ideas and how to make things work in a way that looks for win-win outcomes. And the article basically goes on to ask, where they quoted her, is there such a thing as a feminine leadership style? So we've got quant and science on one side. I want you to take us to the other part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so Tim Armstrong, our CEO, his leadership team ranges between, depending on how many people, depending on if we do another acquisition, which please somebody stop us from doing, like Uncle, I'm not just for like 60 days.
We'll do that on the next panel.
But between 40 and 50%, and I think that bar is kind of a measure that once you hit it, it's very hard to go below. And so then you start to look at the impact of that inside the leadership team. And I think the change piece, I bring up the acquisitions partly out of sheer exhaustion, but mostly because I think that's one of the things that's been really helpful to us. So the dynamic when you're under a tremendous amount of stress because you're bringing, you know, many cultures together. We've done 10 major acquisitions or partnerships in the last 14 months. And I think Tim, if he were here, would tell you that what he values in having that diversity around the table is an extreme comfort with high levels of change. and an ability for women to help the rest of the organization in a very unique way manage and navigate through that change that is different. And that comes from not just, we have better conversations and we're softer. It comes with how we talk to people. We have a lot of programs just to the point about instilling that on gender bias when new employees come in, right? We've grown the organization by 2/3 its size in the last year. How are we training people as they come in to be predisposed, not only to follow the example he's setting, but as the organization continues to expand to make sure their tables are diverse. I think the other thing that's really important and how we see it change and impact is that you mentioned Susan Line. She has a fund called Built by Girls that we fund at AOL. And the money we physically put into investing in girls, everyone in the company sees that. And that starts to train a behavior. Our foundation's priority are focused on women and girls. It's truly about letting women do the things that are important to them inside the office and celebrating that, right? So we unleash what women want to do inside of AOL. And it's amazing how many men are married to a woman, how many men have mothers, how many men have daughters, and how supportive, it is not, we have not found it to be alienating whatsoever.
Meredith, can I just
yes,
add something?
please jump in.
For all you guys out there are amazing masculine characteristics of leadership as well. We were talking about the feminine characteristics of leadership, but you guys rock too.
We're
Just saying.
very good
Let's
point.
make
And
sure we.
we're gonna
no,
come to
this
that,
is-
and we're gonna
yeah.
come to where men fit into the conversation, the solutions, etc. You just said something that I think is incredibly profound and somewhat provocative, which is the idea that in times of real stress for companies, you need more diversity at the table.
Yeah.
In fact, I bet if you looked at most companies, that's exactly when it doesn't happen. That's exactly, I think that's the point that Sophie was trying to make earlier. That's exactly when companies tend to abandon the long games. And I would imagine who's advising, who's coaching, who's mentoring plays a big role in how people operate in times of stress. So you've got some strong theories about mentorship. I'd like you to talk about that.
I mean, but I just think back to Jackie's point. That starts usually in the financial markets, meaning that the influence at times of change usually initiate in finance, right? And so the ability to influence that category. So for us, everything has been influenced by finance because it's all been transactional. And the bankers around the table, or the majority of the bankers around the table giving counsel are men. The majority of the consultants that come in about how we integrate teams of people are all men. And so, we wax poetic about Tim, but his insistence and commitment on that is such a powerful example. And so we've talked a lot about mentorship historically. I was mentored by a white male. I feel like I'm confessing. Like, oh my God, yes, a guy mentored me, but he did. And I feel very mentored often by Tim as well. But it's what I think can happen when you bring gender together like that is it can be extremely explosive in terms of potential, because when that connection is made, you get a taste of what it's like to not be afraid of anything or to not be positioning anything, right? I was mentored by a guy that was basically told me that I was a complete idiot anytime I was nervous to do something, right? Like, what are you talking about? Very condescending, and at the same time trained me at a young age not to think through the lens that I had apparently learned from age 11 to 22. So I do think men have, just to Shelley's point, this unbelievable power in unleashing a category of women that are just unprecedented.
So I want Shelley and Regina to both comment on that from their pulpits leading these women's organizations. I want to point out that in that HBR piece, what they said is not only do men have to be involved in the problem, most people in a position to mentor are white men.
Yeah.
So Regina,
good
why
at
don't you
it.
go first?
Yes, I agree. And I had a mentor as well, and he was a male.
Don't say it's true.
But
yeah.
I was looking for a man because I thought the issue in my career is I'm only working for men, so I'd like to understand better the other side. And for me, it was the best. And I would go for a man again,
Yeah.
just because I think if we work together, There's so much we don't have to talk about because it's super clear.
Yeah, yeah.
But with him, I had a discussion which was down to, I had no idea where to go.
Yeah.
But the discussion was important to understand the other side. So one of our best speakers, I have to admit, we are called Women's Speaker Foundation, but one of our best seller today is a man. We have 5 men and 500 women, but there's one man, he's here from Cologne,
Oh, great.
and he is talking about unconscious bias.
It's great.
And he is the best seller on earth about how does a man see the world compared to how does a woman see it. He is amazing. And that's what we need. I don't care who it is, but in that case, it makes so much sense. So I think, yes, you have to have the mix for sure.
So, Shelley, I know you have a lot on the topic of men in this conversation and on the action.
Well, I think, women are 50% of the population, so change won't happen if we don't do this together. So, we actually respelled the word feminism to include the word men, FEMENISM. Modern feminism must include men, we for we. Transformation will only happen if we do it together. And when you think about diversity, and that's a word that also bugs me because I don't really know what that means. Diversity for me is not gender, race, or age, it's mindset, and it's a thought process. And the best teams are the ones that have diversity of mind at the table. And I think, when you look at a team, a baseball team, you got a first baseman, a second baseman, a third baseman. You need all the different kind of skills
Yeah.
to have an effective team.
Totally.
So the best teams are the ones that have diversity of thought, skill, and mind, which will ultimately probably ladder back to masculine and feminine characteristics of leadership. And I think that this is how we have to start thinking about it, because if we want the best teams, then we will have to adjust the cultures to attract the best talent
Yep.
with more flexibility, which is what, and I think that when we break the problem into buckets, it makes it more manageable.
Yeah.
So we break it into wage gap. Close the wage gap. Mark Benioff from Salesforce says, push the damn button, see where your inequality is, fix it. It's going to pinch, ouch, it'll hurt. Moving forward, adjust accordingly. Why not? That's what technology is. It's our best friend for that reason today. Unconscious bias, how do we get past this conversation? Culture of care. How do we create an organization that allows the best talent to rise to the top and stick with it? And how do we create visibility for leaders that are creating the right culture for today of equality for the right reasons? I think all those things matter.
Beautifully said. I want to ask one more question on operating models, and then I want to go to visibility and how we get more of it beyond this particular conversation. And that is, what's not working? And I'm going to put that out as a jump ball to all of you. So we've talked about unconscious bias, we've talked about data, we've talked about transparency around the data, but what are the things that you thought would work at your company or you thought would work in the world and aren't actually working yet? Is anybody willing to share something? Jackie,
I
brave,
have one
brave.
that is beginning to strike me. And I don't know that I'm right yet, but you guys will have an opinion. I feel like we are, I think we can be, as women, our own challenge. And I think we have to put ourselves out there more. There's so many studies that have been done that if, you guys have heard this, I'm sure, if you have like 10 requirements for a job description, a man may hit 3 out of the 10 or 4 out of the 10 and go like, I got this. Women look at it and say, if I don't have 8 or 9, I actually shouldn't compete.
Yep.
We're not putting ourselves out there in a way that I think we can and should, and yet we expect to somehow be treated on equal footing. And I'm not suggesting that everything we've talked about here today is not relevant and right, but we also have a responsibility to step up and have a voice, and don't agree to sit in the seat that's not at the table, sit at the table, have an opinion, add value, and push it forward. The article that where Cindy Gallup was on the cover of Ad Age,
Yes.
that quote where she said, I just weep when I see the potential that could be there. Well, we all own that potential as people, not as women or as men, as a people. So I think that we have a responsibility that we may not always call out.
Yeah.
Yes, please,
And
Regina.
I think my experience is we designed a format which is called rehearsal session. And there, of course, we're going to train people how to get on stage, but stage is everything, not just here. It's in front of your boss, in front of your
Exactly.
board, whatever. So you have to practice, you have to exercise. First of all, we don't do that, but why don't we do it? Because we don't say yes. So I think adding to that
yes.
is a lot of be brave. Just go forward it and take risk. And I think this is something which in my career, in my past career, women missed a lot. And we really have to motivate them and get out there and just do it. You say yes, scream, die, whatever afterwards, call us.
Yeah.
But go for it, because it's this one opportunity you might have to get the new job or to get a bigger team or more budget. But say yes and then get in the
Yeah.
doubts and
I-
figure out
I-
how you solve it.
I mean, so there's a woman, Makers, which is a women's leadership brand we have, Carla Harris. If you go on makers.com and search for her video, she's vice chairman of Morgan Stanley, African American woman growing up in small town Alabama. If you know the United States, small town Alabama is like not where the vice chairman of Morgan Stanley, much less a girl from from Alabama. But she has this amazing quote, which is, the most important things that will be said about you will be said about you when you're not in the room. And so I just think to this exact point, knowing how to influence on the front end and all the time, because it's not just watching you perform. It's how do you influence how people think about you. And I don't think women do an amazing job of that. We think, great, we're going to deliver and it's going to be awesome. And it's not necessarily the thing that matters.
Not enough.
So
I
to
want-
be fair,
Carolyn.
Meredith, I think it's really hard for some women, particularly junior women, to have the confidence to do the
Yeah.
things that we're saying.
Yeah.
And confidence is something that I have struggled with, and I've been in the business for over 20 years, and I have a wonderful position at Facebook, tremendous support, and my confidence still gets rocked to this day
Totally.
as certain things happen. And I think as women in the industry, as particular more senior women and men, the more sensitive we are to actually boosting younger
Each other.
women's confidence, that they can sit at the table, they can take their full maternity leave, because men should be taking their full maternity leave. I just spent 6 weeks on a sabbatical. It was an amazing time with my family, but I also did it to say to the whole entire company, it's okay. The work will go on, but we need to instill that confidence, because I think it's something that many women in particular struggle with, and I don't think we talk about it enough.
Yeah.
So perfect segue to my last question, which is for Shelley, and then I'll do a quick wrap up. How do we make this much more visible? How do we get the whole world to, as you always say, if they're going to be it, they have to see it? How do you make that happen?
I think we create accountability and step change, because I think part of the thing is just solutions. I think we all want to evolve and advance and make progress. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have today is in what we call middle management. We call it the messy middle. It's just the messy middle. The biggest problem, we enter the workforce 50-50. It's in the middle that, women fall off. At that point of their career, it's the opt-in, opt-out. So we need to encourage them to move up the ladder. And guys in the messy middle have an issue too, because we haven't trained them in the right way to support women to rise to the top. And I think that is just the biggest identifying piece of the bucket that we need to work on. In technology, it's entry level. There is still a very sexist, environment of predominantly men, where women just have this fear factor, of pushing in. So they don't drop out of the workforce, they just choose another career, which is a big challenge for us. So I think we need to create accountability for ourselves. It's not about pointing fingers and saying you're doing a bad job. It's about looking in the mirror and being open to, where are you as an organization? Where do you want to go? And create that step change together, and not be afraid to make mistakes along the way, because you're going to, and that's okay. And by the way, perfection is just boring. So don't try to be perfect. Just take that step and look back one day and say, wow, look how far I've come, and be proud of yourself and celebrate that.
So we were only imperfect in that I think we've run out of time and run a bit over, but best things heard in this extraordinary conversation. Shelley Zalis, stop admiring the problem. Carolyn Everson, there is not enough quant in the conversation. Sophie, 2.5 decades at one company, you have to play a long game, and diversity is a measure. Inclusion is the skill we need to be looking for. Jackie and Carolyn both gave us a whole body around you can't fix what you can't measure, and everybody will walk out of here thinking about that. And somehow, Shelley and Allie reminded us you also have to connect the data to the softer things. Allie said, and not enough people, in my opinion, talk about this, diversity matters most in the hardest, worst, and most stressful situations. And then she said this quiet little comment that we didn't really get to talk about much, which might have been the best thing said. At AOL, we unleash what women want to do. I love that. Shelley told us the modern feminism includes men and should be spelled that way. Jackie told us, and I love this, she wrote about it in her Lean In blog, we have a responsibility to step up, to have a voice, to take the promotion. And Regina, who I think had the very best comment of the whole panel, said, God damn it, just be brave and train yourself to use your power when you're in a room and other people see it. So Shelley, Sophie, Carolyn, Jacqueline, Regina, and Allie, a big thank you, and a big thank you to all of you.
Thank you to you.
Go, Meredith.